What's your reaction to the Supreme Court ruling today on the 1849 abortion ban?
I haven't had a chance to review it yet this morning. I've been working on some other things, but it appears that once again the state Supreme Court liberals sort of went rogue and overturned legislative power.
Do you plan to introduce any sort of legislation regarding abortion after this ruling?
Like I said, I'm not even sure what weird rationale our liberal Supreme Court used to do this.
Are you comfortable with the 20-week ban that's on the books from the Walker days?
Well, I voted for it.
All right, good morning, everybody. First, thank you for joining us. I'm Attorney General Josh Kaul, and I am pleased to be joined by a number of folks who have been strong advocates for reproductive freedom. You're going to hear from me first, and then following me, you'll hear from Michelle Velazquez, the Chief Strategy Officer at Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin, and then Dr. Amy Domeyer, who's an OBGYN in Madison, and the immediate past chair of the Wisconsin section of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. So this morning, the state Supreme Court handed down a decision that ruled that there is no broad, sweeping, near-total criminal abortion ban in the state of Wisconsin. Today's ruling marks a major victory for reproductive freedom following the uncertainty and harm to women's health that have resulted from the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We began this fight for reproductive freedom in Wisconsin just over 3 years ago. Just over 3 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned nearly 50 years of precedent in reversing Roe v. Wade. As a result, there was widespread concern that abortion was almost entirely banned in the state of Wisconsin. Just days after that decision was issued in Roe, I stood with Governor Evers and others to announce that we had filed suit seeking to block enforcement of what is widely known as the 1849 abortion ban. Today, just over 3 years after we filed that suit, we have now received clarity from the Wisconsin Supreme Court. When we filed that suit, we made clear that we wanted, first of all, to protect reproductive freedom in the state of Wisconsin. But we also wanted to bring clarity so that doctors in Wisconsin, women in Wisconsin, and others would know what the state of the law was in the state of Wisconsin. And while there is certainly more progress to be made, as we will talk about shortly, we have, in fact, now succeeded in protecting access to safe and legal abortion in Wisconsin and providing the clarity that we sought through this case. I want to specifically thank the folks at DOJ who have been working on this case for 3 years now. Their work has been invaluable to today's result. They certainly were not alone in fighting for this result. You'll hear from some other folks today who were involved as well. But this is really the result of a team effort, and I want to say thank you to everybody who was part of that. I also want to share a few observations in light of what's happened over the past 3 years in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, for 15 months, women in Wisconsin had to experience something that for essentially 2 generations people hadn't had to go through, which was being denied the autonomy and the freedom to make their own reproductive health care decisions. And we were able to see the devastating impacts that change in approach had on people's lives in Wisconsin. I heard from people who were impacted. You're welcome to put your microphone there, AJ.
In the budget too.
We were able to see the impact that had on people's lives. People were denied access to the health care they needed. People in emergency situations went to doctors who then had to go speak to lawyers before they could make decisions about what medical care could be provided. The people of Wisconsin made clear that they do not support that approach, and people were devastated by what happened. One thing that stuck with me as a parent is the impact that it had on people's interest in having kids. There were people who had healthy pregnancies who were worried about what would happen if a complication arose. There were people who didn't want to take the chance that they might get pregnant because they didn't want to lose the autonomy to control their futures. We can't let Wisconsin return to that kind of environment again. So while this decision is an incredibly positive step for freedom, I also think it's critical that our legislature do what the Supreme Court suggested in Dobbs and take up this issue and hear from Wisconsinites about how we can better protect reproductive freedom for the long term in Wisconsin so that the next generation of Wisconsinites doesn't have to deal with old laws on the books that haven't been changed. The other thing I want to say is that when we filed this case, the makeup of the state Supreme Court was different. People asked me if I felt good about our odds of success and what I said at the time. And what I say now is that I did feel confident that we had a chance of winning this case because I thought we were right on the law. The arguments we made have now been vindicated. But at a time when the rights of Wisconsinites and Americans are under threat, this case is a stark reminder of how important it is that we fight for our rights, that we advocate for what is in the best interests of the people of our state, and that we stand on the side of freedom. Here today, we were able to achieve a significant victory for the freedom of Wisconsinites. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Velasquez, who's up next from Planned Parenthood.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Michelle Velasquez. I'm an attorney and the Chief Strategy Officer at Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin. Attorney General Call is right. Today's decision from the Wisconsin Supreme Court is a victory for patients and for basic human dignity. Abortion is and remains available in Wisconsin. We are relieved and grateful that the court has recognized what patients, providers, and communities have known all along, that the 1849 law does not and should not govern abortion care in our state. This decision is part of the work of Planned Parenthood's work to restore access in Wisconsin after the chaos and harm caused by the Dobbs decision. For more than a year, patients were forced to travel out of state, delay care, or face the terrifying prospect of not being able to get the health care they needed at all. At Planned Parenthood, providers and other staff traveled out of state to provide additional support at Planned Parenthood of Illinois. Today's ruling restores some stability for patients and providers. It affirms what doctors needed to know, that they can do their jobs and that the people in Wisconsin can make decisions that are right for themselves and their families, and that they have the autonomy and freedom to do that. But restoring access is only the beginning. The fight to protect access is far from over. Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin is disappointed that the court did not take up the broader constitutional challenge that it brought last year. At a time when politicians are doing everything in their power to strip away rights, when the U.S. Congress is voting literally today to defund Planned Parenthood and block millions of patients from the care they rely on, our state courts must step up to protect these fundamental freedoms, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because the Wisconsin Constitution demands it. And let's be clear, abortion access isn't the only fight. We're seeing relentless attacks on access to birth control, cancer screenings, STI testing and treatment, gender-affirming care, and the basic ability of people to access health care and have control over their own bodies and their own lives. And that's why we must keep going, not just to restore, but to protect and expand access. Expand the ability for every person in Wisconsin to get the care they need, no matter who they are, where they live, or how much money they make. That means passing laws that guarantee the right to abortion. It means fighting in court to make sure that those rights are real and protected, and it means standing up together against every attack, whether it comes from Washington, D.C., or right here in our own state. So today is definitely a win, but it is not the end of the fight. It's fuel for the work ahead. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Amy Domeyer. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here and for this really defining moment in our state. I'm an OBGYN in Madison and the immediate past chair of the Wisconsin section of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. I trained to be an OBGYN long after Roe was decided, but I recall as a resident receiving teaching from one of our faculty on abortion care. He described to me what felt like a long ago era during which abortion was illegal and patients risked their health and lives when attempting to end their pregnancies. I recall his anecdotes feeling more like a history lesson rather than preparing me for my future career. In June of 2022, the Dobbs decision changed everything. An archaic 1849 law reemerged and was interpreted as banning abortions except during a life-saving emergency, which cast doubt on our ability to provide standard reproductive health care to our patients. Physicians from across the state, not just OBGYNs, but emergency medicine physicians, internists, family medicine providers as examples, came together with questions, most resounding of which was how sick is sick enough? Many of us feared watching our patients suffer as complications threatened their health and lives. We worked the best we could within our institutions and professional societies to come up with a shared understanding of how and when we could provide life-saving abortion care to our patients, all while grieving our inability to provide the standard full reproductive spectrum of care or to protect ourselves against a felony charge. I recall caring for a patient with a life-threatening pregnancy complication who needed abortion care during this time. I looked around the operating room at the nurses, the anesthesia team, and feared for the patient's safety, but also my own. Was this life-threatening condition life-threatening enough? I also recall a moment on labor and delivery with a trainee who said, "We aren't really going to know where the line is until one of us goes to jail." The comment was a punch to the gut. Our profession was thrown into chaos while all of us were worried about how our patients could get the health care that they needed. Today's decision reaffirms that these important health decisions should be made between a patient and their healthcare provider. Yet so many Wisconsinites still lack access. Abortion care is available, but highly restricted in Wisconsin, and many state laws, most of which lack medical or scientific basis, continue to interfere with the doctor-patient relationship and our ability to provide care for our patients. Mandatory in-person visits, a 24-hour waiting period between consent for an abortion and provision of care, prohibitions on telehealth and insurance coverage, restrictions on care over 20 weeks of pregnancy are some of the myriad barriers patients face when trying to access abortion care in Wisconsin. And these laws also disproportionately affect rural or low-income people in a state with growing healthcare deserts. Today, we celebrate this milestone in reaffirming a patient's ability to access abortion services in Wisconsin, but we also recognize the essential steps that must be taken to ensure that true access to care is met, and re-examining laws that do not serve the health and well-being of Wisconsinites and which threaten the relationship between doctors and their patients. And together, we will continue to work to move reproductive health care in Wisconsin forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again to everybody who's here. With that, we're happy to open up to questions.
As you mentioned, the other case was dismissed today. Do you see an avenue for new lawsuit constitutional claims? And would that be brought in by you or Planned Parenthood or someone else? And would you do that in circuit court or is Supreme Court?
We obviously are just in the process of reviewing. I actually hadn't even seen that order yet. So we will be assessing what's happened today and thinking about sort of next steps. So at this point, I don't have any additional information to add on that, but obviously this is a topic that's been in the court, not just in this case, but in a variety of other cases, and so we'll see what unfolds.
Are there plans to challenge other abortion restrictions that are on the books in Wisconsin, and if so, what restrictions are most concerning to you?
Well, like I said, we don't have any specific plan at this point in time. What I do think is important, and I touched on this before, is for the legislature to begin hearing from Wisconsinites about this issue. We unfortunately had 15 months where people were denied access, and I think that really illuminated for people some of the challenges that are in place in Wisconsin. And I think it's brought to the fore some of these topics that you just heard Michelle and Dr. Domeyer speak about. I think we need to have an open discussion about this topic in Wisconsin and a debate. That's what the Supreme Court called for when it said it was returning these issues to the state, because we can do better through state legislation in establishing protections for continuing access to safe and legal abortion and ensuring that our laws are updated.
What are you looking for specifically from the legislature on this that you think you can get them?
Well, I think process is what's most important at this point. I want to have the legislature hear from Wisconsinites about this topic. This is a topic, I mean, you can just look around the room. This is a topic that has drawn immense interest from the public in Wisconsin because it has an immense impact on the people in the state of Wisconsin. And the legislature hasn't, to much a degree, addressed this topic. Hearing from Wisconsinites about this, hearing from folks like some of the folks here with me today about how we can improve our laws and improve healthcare as a whole is really important. And I also want to highlight a topic that came up earlier, which is, there is we are talking about this in the context of abortion here, but this is also an important topic in the context of access to healthcare more broadly. There is a bill that may be up today in Congress that could significantly reduce access, and we can't separate those issues out. One of the things I heard about as we were litigating this case was about the impact on providers in Wisconsin from these laws, about OBGYN students, for example, who were concerned about coming to Wisconsin because they might not be able to practice, or they might be under threat of prosecution for practicing. They might not be able to get the training that they would be able to get in other states. Likewise, with the drastic cuts we're facing to Medicaid, rural hospitals are going to have an incredibly difficult time remaining open. I know that there are provisions that have been made to try to address that, but this is part of a broader attack on access to health care. So both hearing from Wisconsinites about this issue and about access to health care generally, I think is critically important for our legislature.
I have a question for Michelle. The last question. You mentioned the congressional bill that would deny funding through Medicaid to Planned Parenthood. If that gets enacted, what are the practical effects of that in Wisconsin? What services, how would you change your operations? Will it affect abortion services? Will it affect other services?
That's an excellent question. It's a little too early to tell exactly how it will impact, but we know there will be an impact. The congressional bill that would defund Planned Parenthood would make Planned Parenthood essentially a prohibited entity, meaning it could not seek reimbursement from Medicaid for services like contraception care, gender-affirming care, STI treatment, testing, cancer screening, and the list goes on and on. And so the estimate nationally from the Planned Parenthood Federation is that about 200 Planned Parenthood health centers across the country would likely close because just like any other healthcare provider, Planned Parenthood provides a healthcare service and gets reimbursed by insurance plans, whether that coverage is through Medicaid or a private insurance provider. And so certainly there would be an impact in Wisconsin. Annually, Planned Parenthood serves about 50,000 patients in Wisconsin at 21 locations across the state. So undoubtedly, if about 2/3 of the revenue that keeps those health centers churning every day were to disappear, that would absolutely impact the ability of Planned Parenthood to provide the extensive services and care throughout the state that it currently does.
Can you remind me, your clinics in Madison and Milwaukee provide abortion services? Can you tell me where it's available? And are there any other providers in the state?
Sure. So Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin offers abortion care in Milwaukee, here in Madison, and then in Sheboygan. The Sheboygan Health Center is a medication abortion service only. There are 2 other providers of abortion care in Wisconsin, both located in Milwaukee as well. So when the Attorney General is talking about access to healthcare broadly, this is just one example of the very limited access that there is to specifically abortion care in Wisconsin.
Before we go, I'll take a question, but before we do that, I just want to add something. Let me just say this. We were talking about this in the context of losing Planned Parenthood services. There's no plan B here. If Planned Parenthood is not providing these services, they are going to become largely unavailable for a lot of Wisconsinites. And they provide a wide spectrum of reproductive health care services. There may be efforts to find patchwork solutions, but we're talking fundamentally about denying people access to basic health care in this country. So this isn't just an attack on Planned Parenthood, though it certainly is. It's an attack on the access of Wisconsinites and people across the country to basic health care. And that's, again, part of a broader effort we're seeing with these potential massive cuts that may be passed by Congress. And again, I've stressed this before and I'll stress again. The reason that Congress is considering denying basic access to health care for lots of Americans, potentially causing hospital closures, is to give massive tax cuts to some of the wealthiest people in America. So I think it's important that we're really clear about what the stakes are here. If you want to add to that, please feel free. You know the details better than I do. But Planned Parenthood services are vital because they're the only provider in a lot of these areas.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think what I would just add is that it's about Medicaid-covered patients, but it goes beyond that, right? Because if Planned Parenthood doesn't exist, the patients that are uninsured or have other types of healthcare coverage, they also have nowhere to go. And there isn't the healthcare infrastructure in this state to absorb all of the patients that Planned Parenthood sees annually. I believe that the Guttmacher Institute estimated that federally qualified health centers or public health departments would have to increase their capacities by about 144% in order to take those patients. And that's just going to be impossible when we're seeing the defunding of healthcare more broadly. Things like Title X, for example, have gone away. So there really is this sort of broader attack on access to basic healthcare services across the state and across the country. And it ultimately will cost everybody their health, their well-being, and it's just frankly unacceptable.
This is a question for Planned Parenthood, but given that your challenge to the 19th century state law was dismissed, do you have plans to bring challenges to other abortion laws in Wisconsin?
What I can say is that there's still an open question as to whether or not the Wisconsin Constitution guarantees the right to bodily autonomy and therefore the right to abortion care. And we are committed to advancing all avenues to protect abortion access for the long term in this state, and that will include examining all of the current laws on the books to determine whether there's another appropriate vehicle to bring an action against, and simultaneously legislation. There's a bill that was introduced earlier this year that would create a statutory right to abortion, as well as remove some of those harmful, medically unnecessary restrictions that hasn't had any movement. So there are, I think, two different avenues to achieve this ultimate same goal, which is advancing and protecting and expanding reproductive freedoms in this state, which is in alignment with what the people of the state deserve and what they have time and time again said that they want.
What bill is that?
I do not know the number off the top of my head. I am so sorry.
Do you know the sponsor?
Senator Kelda Royce and Representative Lisa Subek.
Attorney General, is it your understanding following this ruling that the law of the land now is the 20-week ban that took effect under former Governor Walker?
Yeah, so in light of this ruling, what this ruling made clear is that the 1849 law that people have talked about so much is not in effect in Wisconsin. There is no sweeping criminal abortion ban. There is, as you mentioned, a 20-week ban on the books in Wisconsin. There are a variety of other laws. But certainly in the first 20 weeks of pregnancy, access to abortion in Wisconsin is safe and legal in light of this ruling.
Quick question, Attorney General Paul. Kind of like you mentioned, there was that, 15, kind of month period where this was, outlawed for doctors, for physicians, for providers, and of course for patients. Tell me there's been so much back and forth with this. What would you say to people who are tired, who are like, I'm not even going to try in Wisconsin anymore because God knows what's going to happen to me?
Well, I think one of the things that's great about today's decision is we now have clarity from the highest state court, the ultimate decision maker on this issue, about what Wisconsin law provides. So there was a 15-month period when access to safe and legal abortion was essentially unavailable in the state of Wisconsin, but it has now been available for a period of time. And today's decision brings clarity about what the state of the law in Wisconsin is. And that is that there is no broad, sweeping criminal abortion ban that dates back to the 19th century in effect in the state of Wisconsin. All right. Thank you all very much.